Asalaamu alaikum, and welcome back to Reborn Muslim, the podcast all about being a revert to Islam. I'm your host, Avalon, and today I want to talk about praying in public, completing your salah in public. This is something I have struggled with so much throughout my almost 3 years of being Muslim. And I know that a lot of born Muslims struggle with this as well. It's not just us reverts, because any Muslim living here in the West, where I live, in America or whatever country it might be, struggles with this. I know it. I hear about it all the time, that people will tell me, like, I can't believe you pray in public, or like, I could never imagine praying in public, even born Muslims. So I know that this is a topic that really goes beyond just being a revert and, the awkwardness and issues that we face as reverts. It affects all Muslims living in non-Muslim countries. And it makes sense if you think about it, because we don't have as many masjids as, obviously, as a Muslim country, or even in a Muslim country. I feel like, from what I've heard from the friends I have who visit there, or who have family in Arab countries or wherever it might be, or Indonesia or anywhere else, it seems like there's, first of all, masjids everywhere, and secondly, like a place to pray, a designated place to pray in most buildings or structures. Like, it seems like that's just kind of built into society, which obviously makes sense. If Muslim, or if Islam is the dominant religion, they're going to have that. And so I feel like, even if you're not going to a masjid, it's easier to complete your prayer in a Muslim country, because it's like set up for you everywhere. Like, anywhere you need to pray, you can. However, in the West, of course, Islam is a minority religion. So we don't have, first of all, as many masjids, and secondly, we don't have like a place to pray. That's like such a new idea to me from becoming a Muslim, like, or through becoming a Muslim. I've been exposed to this idea of like having a prayer room. Like, I never even thought of that before. That's like not something I was ever exposed to before, because in American culture, it's very much like you go out and you work and you go to school and you live your life. And then on Sundays, you go to church. And the two are very separate. And I'm sure there's going to be some people who are going to church 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week for different events and volunteering. But that's the minority. Most people, they go to Sunday, go to church on Sunday, and that's about the end of their religiosity. So this idea of like constant prayer, or praying 5 times a day throughout the day, and so much so that you need a space designated just to pray, was something so new to me. So of course, it is very difficult to complete your prayers in public, just because you know that there's people watching you, and you know that it's you're going to get stares, and it's going to be awkward, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and people might come up to you, right? And what are you supposed to do if you're praying, if you're in the middle of your prayer, and somebody comes up to you and tries to say something or whatever? You can't break your prayer. You have to complete it. So it's very nerve-wracking. And I know, for me personally, I used to get so like petrified to pray in public, not even just a little scared. I was terrified. I would shake when I had to pray in public. That's how scared I would be. I would avoid it at all costs. And unfortunately, way, way back when I first converted, I didn't really let it set in how important prayer really is. I didn't understand all the rules of Islam, and I thought it's like, it's really bad if you miss your prayer, but it's also like, well, okay, whatever, just get over it. I didn't realize how bad it was. And so a lot of times I just wouldn't pray astaghfirullah. Like, when I was out or when I was at work or whatever, I would be like, well, okay, there's no place for me to pray, so I guess I'll just like make it up when I get home, or I'll just pray when I get home, whatever. So that's terrible. And I look back at that time and I'm like, well, it's disappointing because I didn't know. But I know, even for some Muslims, unfortunately, that fear and that worry that people are going to hurt them or something bad's going to happen will cause them to do that, even though they know the consequences, even though they know that salah is obligatory and it's in fact the first thing we're going to be asked about on the Day of Judgment by Allah. It's extremely, extremely important. Even though they know that, I know that people will stop doing it in public because they're just too scared. So I want to talk today about how to get over that fear, how to deal with this fear of praying in public, which is a very real fear. I understand where it's coming from. I felt it for so long, and I still feel it to some extent now. But I'll just talk about my experiences, how I got over it, and how you can get over it too, and why it's important. So that was a very long, drawn-out intro. Sorry. But in the name of Allah, Bismillah, let's get started. So I would say the biggest piece of advice I can give you when it comes to praying in public is you have to get started sometime. Like you have to get started. I don't know how else to say it. Because for me, again, when I first converted, I was just like, well, I'm just not going to do that. There's just no way. I'm just like way too scared. And I wasn't even a hijabi yet, really early on. Like I think I started wearing hijab full time about 5 months after converting. So people didn't know I was Muslim. And also it was just so first of all, when I pray, then they're going to know I'm Muslim because they see the hijab. And secondly, I'm going to be praying. That's something weird to people, and the motions that we go through. It's something strange. And I'm just really worried. You know what I mean? I was just so scared. And the fear contributed to me committing these sins and not praying, not keeping up in my prayer, unfortunately. And so once I started getting used to it, though, once I just started making it a priority and telling myself, you know what? Like, what am I doing? Right? Like once I've learned more and more about Islam and learned more about my faith and what I was supposed to be doing, then it became so clear to me that nothing else should be my priority other than completing my salah throughout the day. That should be like my biggest priority. And the reality is, I'm not always going to make it to a masjid, and I'm not always going to make it home in time. And I've heard some very conservative Muslims say, well, women shouldn't be praying in public. I'm like, okay, Sheikh. It's just, I'm not a scholar, but it's hard for me to accept that, because it's like, at that point, I can't have a job. Do you realize that? Because I work 7:30 to 5:30. So what am I supposed to do? I don't work from home. I work in the office. And if I try to go to a masjid every single time to pray, like that's not going to happen, right? I'm going to have to pray in the office. And even when I go out throughout the day, it's like sometimes, like right now, it's winter and the prayers are very close to each other. It happens all the time that I'm out and I'm like, oh, time for prayer. And what am I supposed to do? Just pray late? So I think this idea that, women can't pray outside or women shouldn't pray outside, that I've heard some people say, I don't hear a lot of people say that, but I do hear that opinion. I just want to acknowledge it because it's out there. I think it's very, I hate to use this word because it's overused, but it's coming from a privileged perspective where it's like, oh, women don't have to work and women don't have to take care of themselves and go out and buy the groceries and run errands. They can just stay home all the time. It's like, no, that's not true. Like, we're going to school, we're going to work, we're running errands. We're also spending time with friends, hanging out with friends, like, and family and all these other things. Like, what are we supposed to do? Just literally stay at home all the time? It's not possible. So, anyways, I had to get that off my chest. So you're gonna have to pray outside sometimes. And yeah, I think for me, like I was saying, I think one of the big things for me was just realizing like where my priorities need to be and having that shift happen in my priorities. Because I think before, unfortunately, what I was prioritizing was, I mean, partially my safety, but really I was prioritizing not being stared at and not being looked at differently. That's what I was prioritizing. I didn't want to be the odd man out. I didn't want people staring at me and thinking I was weird and this and that. I just wanted to fit in just like everyone else and nobody look at me and nobody treat me differently. That's what I've always wanted. I don't want attention. I don't want everyone looking at me. I just want to just live my life, you know? And so the idea of people staring at me, especially for something as sensitive as my faith and so personal as my faith, terrified me. It was such a burden on my heart. But like I said, once I started making it my priority, then I got to a place where I was like, okay, I have no choice. I'm going to have to pray in public sometimes. I can do it as little as I possibly can, right? Like I can try to make sure that I get home in time or get to a masjid in time, like as much as I possibly can. I'll try to plan my life around it. But inevitably, there is going to be situations where you are not going to make it home in time and you are not going to make it to a masjid in time. There's just no way around it. A good example is like at Disneyland. I have a Disneyland pass. I live in Southern California. And so sometimes I'll go to Disneyland with a friend and we'll be there all day. What am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? There's no much shit at Disneyland. Let me just tell you that. So when you're in that situation, it's like you have to plan ahead, especially when you already know you're going to be in that situation. So that's kind of the place I got to where I was like, okay, I know for a fact I'm not going to get home in time. You know what I mean? I can't just lie to myself and say, oh, maybe I'll get home in time. Because sometimes you'll be like, well, if I just leave this event a little early, and you never know, you should assume you're not going to make it home in time. But, you might think, well, I can squeeze it in. Like I can just pray right when I get home. But then I started, find myself in situations where I was like, oh, there is literally no way I'm going to get home in time to pray. Like there's no possible way. Um, and so when I was in those situations, I had to make that decision of, you know what, I'm going to be out at that time and my prayer is going to come up and I'm not going to neglect it. I'm not going to do that anymore because now I know how much important prayer is and I can't just let this slip by. Like I have to complete this. And so I was in this uncomfortable phase of like, I knew I had to pray. I knew it was super important and I didn't want to do it in public, even though I like prayer and it's such a, it's such a calming thing. It should be. I didn't want to do it because I was so uncomfortable with how people would treat me, but I did it anyways. And that awkward phase of a few months of just like really being uncomfortable and forcing myself to just get out there and do it, even though I didn't want to, and it was not the right situation or wasn't a good situation. I was so uncomfortable, but just forcing myself to do it anyways, that made all the difference. And I feel like it set me up for success later on because now, alhamdulillah, I'm at a place where like I don't really feel that uncomfortable to pray in public. Like I don't really care. Like especially if I'm in a place that I'm more familiar with, because then I kind of know what to expect of the people, right? Like, and you never know. There's always going to be crazy people out in society. So you can't predict who's going to be where, you know what I mean? Or how people are going to react to you. But especially when I'm in a place that I'm familiar with, and even if I'm not in a place I'm familiar with, I'm just gonna get out there and pray. Like I'm just gonna make it happen. And I don't get as nervous. And I still do get nervous, but not nearly as bad as before. But like I said, it did definitely take a few months of being uncomfortable, of just like wishing this wasn't happening and just wanting to rush through it so nobody would stare at me and nobody would hurt me or anything. Before I started to realize, you know what? No one really cares. That's really the conclusion I came to. Like I realized afterwards, like after so many times of praying in public and nobody doing literally anything other than like staring at me sometimes, but whatever. Um, I realized nobody cares. Nobody's gonna do anything. And even if they do care, even if they literally hate me and they think I'm awful, what are they gonna do? You know what I mean? What are they actually gonna do? But with that in mind, I do want to mention a few things you might want to take into consideration when you are praying in public, just to keep you safe, just in case. Because, of course, like the old phrase goes, trust in Allah, but tie your camel, right? Like, so don't pray in a really unsafe place and be like, well, Allah's going to protect me. It's like, okay, well, why praying there, right? So try to find a safe place. One thing I try to do is find somewhere where less people are. Like it's not like literally right in the middle of a bunch of people. And I guess it could be an argument made for either that it's like if you're around more people, it's less likely for someone to hurt you. But then again, if you're around more people, it's more likely that if there's somebody that would hurt you, they're going to see you, right? So the way I see it is like wherever I am, let me just get to a very like quiet place where there's not a lot of people around, get my prayer done. It doesn't take very long, and then just go on with my day. So that's one thing to consider is try to find somewhere that's first of all clean. Of course, you have to pray somewhere clean. And the world is our masjid, as I know has been said before. Like we can pray wherever we want. But it has to be clean. It can't have something that an animal left behind or etc. Like it needs to be clean to the best of your knowledge. So find somewhere clean that's actually appropriate for you to pray, but also try to find somewhere that's not super, crowded. I would advise. Another thing I try to do that I kind of touched on already is I try to plan ahead. So whenever I know ahead of time where I'm going to be one day, like, I mean, most days I know where I'm going to be, right? Like usually I'm at work and then whatever. And then on Fridays I get off early, I go to Juma and all of this, and I'll go out shopping or whatever it might be or see a friend or something. So since you know these things ahead of time, you know where you're going to be usually in most situations, try to plan ahead and figure out, okay, at this time, that like Dhuhr is going to start at this time or Asr is going to start at this time. And I'll be pretty close to a masjid. So I'll just stop in at the masjid before I go see my friend or after I go see my friend. Or if it's a Muslim friend, then we'll go together. We'll meet at the masjid or something like that. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, planning ahead makes a big difference. And even if it's not going to be the masjid, I even try to plan ahead when it's just going to be me and I'm not even going to be praying at the masjid. I'll just be praying somewhere random because I know a prayer spot there. Like I know a tried and true spot that I've prayed at more than one time that I'll be safe there. So it's like just try to plan ahead so that you're not caught off guard. Because if you don't plan ahead, then you're going to find yourself there in the situation. You're going to be panicked and you might not be with wudu. You might have to make wudu and there's nowhere to make it. And prayer ends like, or the next prayer starts in like half an hour. That's a terrible situation to find yourself in. I've been in that situation far too many times. So don't put yourself in that situation. Don't set yourself up for failure. Set yourself up for success. Plan out where you're going to pray and potential places you can pray before it even happens. Another thing to consider is what you're wearing. Because if you're not used to praying in public and you're not a hijabi, for example, or you're a man that likes to wear shorts, you need to make sure that you're covering yourself, right? If you didn't know, men are supposed to cover from their knees to their navel when they pray at a bare minimum. So if you're wearing shorts, most shorts don't go past the knees. I almost never see shorts for men that go past the knees. And for sisters, of course, like we're supposed to cover our hair and we're supposed to be wearing loose clothing that covers everything. So if you're not a hijabi yet, if you're not, you haven't made it there yet, or if you're a man that wears shorts, these are things to take into consideration. That, okay, I'm going to have to pray when I'm out. I'm not going to have something to just throw on at home. I won't have my prayer dress that I use at home. Have something with you. Ideally, you want to get to a place where what you wear to pray is what you wear on a daily basis. Like that's just what you leave the house in, right? That's the goal for all of us, inshallah, that we're dressing modestly enough that we don't actually have to change anything we're wearing or wear any additional pieces of clothing just to pray. Like the outfit we're wearing should be good enough as it is because those are the same rules. Because the same dress code for just normal everyday life is, the dress code for prayer. If you think about it, it's exactly the same. So ideally, we want to get to that place, but I'm just trying to meet people where they're at. And I understand that not everybody is there yet. Not everybody has, started dressing that modestly yet. And that's, everybody's on their own path. And I know it's not easy. But when you pray, you do have to have everything covered up, right? Like you do need to be covered up. So keeping that in mind, try to bring something with you that you can easily cover yourself up with. Hopefully if you're a sister, you're already at least dressing modestly, but maybe you're struggling with the hijab, for example. I know a lot of sisters like that where their clothes are good, like they're not dressing revealingly, but it's the hijab that they're struggling with. So just bring a scarf with you. You know what I mean? Just have it in mind that, okay, you need to have a prayer mat and you have to have a scarf. Or if you're a brother and you wear shorts, bring whatever it might be, a towel to wrap around yourself or something. Shorts, that's a pretty easy fix. Just wear pants. Hijab, it's a little harder to start wearing the hijab. I understand that. It's obligatory. We all know we should be wearing it. But if you're not there yet, again, try to start wearing it out because it's going to make your life easier and it's an obligation, most importantly. But again, I'm trying to meet people where they're at. So just make sure you have that in the back of your mind and you have either if you have a car and you drive places, then have a scarf in your car or have a towel or whatever it might be in your car so that you don't have to worry about finding something different to pray in. You see what I'm saying? So it just goes hand in hand with planning ahead. Just plan ahead, know where you're going to pray, know that you're going to have the clothes to pray in, and so that you don't have to worry about it. And the last thing I'll mention is, as I've already said, the best way to get comfortable praying is just by getting out there and praying. Like, I don't know how else to say it, but you have to just get started and you'll realize over time, this isn't as bad as I thought it was. And more importantly, you'll realize that, the reason I'm doing this is for the sake of Allah SWT. It's not for myself. It's not to look pious. It's not because someone told me to. It's not because Avalon on her podcast told me I should. You're doing it because it's an obligation that Allah gave us, and it grows and it helps us grow closer to Him also. So when you kind of keep that in mind and you just get out there and start doing it, even though it's uncomfortable and it's scary, when you get out there and just start doing it, it's going to become so much easier over time, inshallah. I promise, for me, it became so much easier with every time that I prayed in public, to where now, again, it doesn't faze me as much. And still there'll be situations where it's I just have to pray in a place where a lot of people happen to be walking past. It just, there's really no way around it. There's just a ton of people. Sometimes we'll pray at the beach. Again, I live in California. And sometimes I'll pray at the beach and there's just so many people. Like, it doesn't even matter where I go. You think the beach is so expansive, but like it's just, it gets so packed that like anywhere I go, there's going to be people. There's no way around it. And that can be uncomfortable. Even I, somebody who gets less phased by these things, even I will still be very uncomfortable sometimes. And I'll be, unfortunately, kind of rushing through my prayer. And I try not to, because it's really not good to rush through your prayer. I try not to, and I try to take my time. But I mean, I can't help the fact that I'm nervous. I'm like really anxious, you know? So that still does happen, but not at all to the extent that it did before. So again, my biggest piece of advice is just have the right intention, start doing it. And also, something I should have mentioned earlier, make dua. Honestly, just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for you, because a lot of times I think the last resource we use is making dua, right? Like, we try to, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself. A lot of times I'll like go out and try to figure out everything for myself and try a million different things, and it doesn't work. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I should make dua about it. I'm like, okay, Allah, like I tried everything. So now can you help me? And then I've realized that over time that I'm like, yeah, maybe I should go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, because he's literally the creator of everything, right? So make dua about it first. If you ask Allah to make something easier for you, in order to strive in his way, to strive in the way of Allah, and to make you a better Muslim and to complete your obligations, I promise you that's not going to go on deaf ears. No, none of your du'as go on deaf ears, but Allah is never going to make it harder for you to follow him, right? He wants you to complete these obligations. It's not a big trick. He's made it very clear for us, and he wants you to be able to complete these. So make dua, make sincere dua, know your intentions, make the intention ahead of time, plan ahead, have the right resources, have the, your mat or something to pray on, have a headscarf and a towel, whatever you need, and just get out there and do it. That's my best piece of advice. Get out there and do it. And please try to remember that this is literally a matter of your afterlife, right? Like, this is not something to play around with. This is not something, oh, well, I didn't really have time today, so whatever. I thought of it that way at first. I unfortunately did not prioritize prayer at all. But once I realized it, I realized what a grave mistake I was making. So I'm making this podcast episode for anyone who is in the same situation as me, not as a judgment, and not to be like, oh, look, I'm better than you because I just pray whenever I need to, and it's not a problem for me. I'm saying it from experience. Like, I'm saying this to my past self as well. Salah is no joke. This is your afterlife. And being stared at is not fun. Being made fun of or mocked, or having people give you weird looks and make you uncomfortable and say weird things to you, that's not fun. It sucks. And that's a very real concern that you don't want that to happen. I completely understand. However, it's nowhere near as bad as having to explain to your creator why you didn't do the very few things that he asked of you to do, right? Like the bare minimum, why you didn't do it. And when you think about it that way, it's like, yeah, I got to find a way, right? Like, it might seem impossible to find a place to pray sometimes, but you will find a way, and you will find a place, and you will find the resources when you have that mindset. So I hope this was a good reminder, and I hope this, gave you some good information and motivation to get out there and pray. Do not make excuses about it. Don't be like I was when I first converted and, just neglecting it, not thinking it's important. Get out there and complete your salah. Nothing could be more important. So that's all I want to talk about today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you again very soon, inshallah, God willing. Asalaamu alaikum.